I think it sold more copies in one day than the Gutenberg Bible did over centuries.
They didn't have enough books.
They ran out of
no
books.
Joke. At Amazon.
They ran out of books.
At Amazon. New York Times White House correspondent Maggie Haberman.
All
and
I want is a book.
White House reporter Jonathan Swan. And I think what's so fascinating is they really capture from many different angles and many different conversations what is going on inside the White House and what narratives it follows. And actually, one of the conversations we were just having really plays into what they found in their reporting for this book.
So, Maggie, why don't you tell us? The book, of course, is Regime Change Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump.
Pablo's here.
Pablo's here. My God.
All right, we'll
I think he's won a Pulitzer Prize.
Secondary market value, guys. I'm hitting the street with this right after this.
Oh, my gosh.
Revel's here, too.
And by the way, that may go up on eBay.
Thank God.
You could have a Pulitzer Prize winner signing that book. And think how much you could sell that, mid-segment, how much you could sell that on eBay. Maggie, we were just talking about Pete Hegseth and this insane idea that they're going to get rid of General Donahue. And it really harkens back to a scene in the tea room at Mar-a-Lago where loyalty, J6 as a litmus test, and in just an overriding hatred of General Milley for being an independent military voice seemed to shape so much of what we saw there and what we might be seeing today.
It was fascinating listening to your discussion before, because it really does relate to these conversations about the cabinet in the tea room at Mar-a-Lago, which is where all these decisions were made in the transition. Very small group of advisors. I'm just going to read it to you because I'm not going to do it justice from memory. But it's about the selection of Pete Hegseth. And it says that the discussion in the tea room turned to the Pentagon. Pete Hegseth, the war veteran and Fox News morning host, was a highly unorthodox choice to manage the Department of Defense with its nearly 3 million employees and its global web of combatant commands. But he received Trump's highest form of praise, that he looked good on television. Nobody's ever looked better on camera than this guy, the president-elect mused. He's been so good to me. Then the president goes on to praise Hegseth's defense of people who had been accused of war crimes and how Hegseth had been very loyal to them. They then go on to talk about Kristi Noem and others, and they talk about how one person's name comes up, Ryan McCarthy, as an Air Force to lead the Air Force. Deputy Secretary of the Air Force.
No, Defense.
Secretary of Defense. Sorry, and he says no, we can't have Ryan McCarthy. Somebody mentions that he was close to Milley or liked Mark Milley, and Trump's reaction is we can't have that. Can't have even 1% Milley.
And there's this crazy other bit. So. Just so you understand the scene, they're inside the tea room at Mar-a-Lago and they've got these screens up and they're just basically doing the slideshow of who Trump's going to pick. That's how they're picking his cabinet. And loyalty is everything. So one of the people's faces that comes up on screen for the national security roles is Robert O'Brien, who served as national security advisor in the first term. And he'd been interviewed for top jobs and people thought, he could be a position. And Trump scowls when he sees him. And he says, because O'Brien on January 6th had said, while he was Trump's national security advisor, he praised Mike Pence. OK, he'd said on that day, I just spoke with Vice President Pence. He's a genuinely fine and decent man. He exhibited courage today as he did at the Capitol on 9/11 as a congressman. I'm proud to serve with him. So here's from the book. He's on screen. They're in the room. Trump says, now Trump studied O'Brien's face contemptuously. There's a beauty, he said. He had a problem on January 6th. On January 7th, he was shaking in his boots, shaking. And now something's happened to the guy. I saw him on camera. He was stiff, like he couldn't move. One of Trump's advisors chimed in to say he'd heard O'Brien was in bad health. I knew there was something wrong with him, Trump said. Get him off of here. Get him off of here. He's another one like Pompeo. Just get him off of here. So what became clear to people in that room is that it wasn't enough that you'd praised Trump on TV, as O'Brien had done. He'd never broken with Trump. He'd praised him, defended him. The fact that he had praised Mike Pence on January 6th was enough to kill his chances of serving in a top national security role. So the reason I think this is important is it just gives you a sense of how these roles were selected. Correct. This is how those top roles in the government, in the national security apparatus, were selected back in November of 2024.
Which is why it's no surprise we end up where we are right now.
Yeah, and they select a guy who they hated, who they knew lied to them during the process. I mean, Susie Wiles, everybody else knew Hegseth was lying. He was giving incomplete information, but they figured why not? But what's so fascinating about what you're saying here is you have a vice president that basically compared Donald Trump to Hitler. You got a vice president that called him cultural heroin. You have other people in the administration that have attacked him, but apparently it is January the 6th. That is the defining point of all of this,
you need
right?
to be pro-rioter?
Yeah, you have to be. You have to have supported the riots and the insurrection.
One of the things that we found in our reporting for this book and in real time, but we were able to go deeper here, is just how much, and Joe, that is exactly the point that you just raised. Vice President Vance, and we write about this, had in a private text exchange compared Trump to Hitler, or at least described him in the same sentence. Marco Rubio obviously had a very extensive primary campaign against the president, but loyalty was being redefined with this question about what you thought about January 6th. Did you think the 2020 election was stolen? And what we wanted to show people is just how in real time those conversations were playing out. And with Hegseth, I just want to make one more point. People in Trump's government had huge concerns about Hegseth, but they had already pulled one nominee in Matt Gaetz, and they were not going to do it again because they believed that they were not going to be able to get anything through if they showed any sense of weakness. And they and their allies hammered Joni Ernst, the one real holdout at the time, to back Hegseth. She's now not going to be in office again next year. So.
Yeah. And so what has that brought them? What it's brought them is Signalgate, which they will all say inside the White House was the first thing that really got them off their rhythm early on, where a guy is bragging about military operations that are about to launch, the Iran war, and now, of course, this controversy with General Donahue. Mika, you've got a guy who's incompetent to be running the Pentagon, and he's causing damage to Donald Trump day in and day out.
And what is the litmus test going to be? You have to be pro-corruption, pro-people who have committed federal offenses, pro-rioters. You have to look at January 6th and see it the way they do instead of the way it is. Yeah. That's pretty scary. I want to go through some of the other themes of the book and why they're important. You go into deep detail about the takeover of the arts, this dramatic situation with the Smithsonian, and then I want to get to tech titans. But why the art and culture, the incursion into art and culture, why does that play into the themes that you're putting together in this book?
So one of the things that we were really struck by last year was how early on Trump and his advisors and allies wanted to leave their imprint on what art Americans can see, on what defines U.S. history. And there was this executive order, I think it was March of last year, that was essentially dictating what could be shown at the Smithsonian's, which is this massive, very revered, congressionally funded network of museums all around Washington. And there's a number of museums and research libraries and so forth. This was deeply impactful within the Smithsonian Central itself. It is led by the first ever Black secretary, Lonnie Bunch. He was the co-founder or founder of the African American Museum several years ago. It was one of his definitive works. And this was about how slavery is talked about. This was about how U.S. history is talked about. And it really is shaping the culture for many, many years forward with the possible threat of losing funding. And so we got very deep inside these Board of Regents meetings, one of which involved the cancellation or the future cancellation of an Amy Sherald exhibit. And Amy Sherald is a renowned artist. She had done a portrait of Michelle Obama, and she had an exhibit that was supposed to be coming to Washington, and it was featured several paintings, but one was a Statue of Liberty as a trans woman. And we got inside this meeting on June 9th, where the vice president and much more aggressively Carlos Jimenez, a congressman from Florida, were demanding the head of the National Portrait Gallery, where this was going to be shown, should be fired. Someone at one point, J.D. Vance leaves the room, and one of his young aides sits next to or near John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who presides over these meetings, and he holds up an iPad and he flips through it and he says, "This is also going to be a problem." He points to that image and says, "This is not what Americans want to see." And this became a huge flashpoint at the Smithsonian. Amy Sherald ultimately pulled her exhibit because she didn't want any sense that there was artistic control over it. It does define how you are seeing Trump and the White House try to put an imprint on all aspects of American life. But please add on to anything I missed.
No, I mean, he was literally just holding up that image.
Jonathan.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. But I just wanted to put in there also, you guys tell this story of the firing of the woman in charge of portraits being fired because Donald Trump found his portrait unflattering.
That's right. But in this meeting, so the famous Amy Sherald painting that was on the cover of the New Yorker, transforming Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, depicted as a trans woman. You have like a 30-something-year-old J.D. Vance staffer holding it up on an iPad. Just picture that. You've got Lonnie Bunch, you've got the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. They're in this revered room. He's holding it up on his iPad and he said, "This is not what Americans want to see." And of course, Amy Sherald cancelled the show because she didn't want to have interference in her exhibition. But this sent shockwaves through the art world. But we managed to just find out exactly what happened behind the scenes.
So, Maggie, one of the real themes in the book is the idea of the bubble that President Trump lives in. Now, and every president does to a degree. But this is an extreme one where he's only receiving information from certain places. And I was struck by even how he's not even on Twitter anymore. It's just Truth Social. And that's a very different world. Speak to us about how that informs a lot of the decisions we see him make.
So one of the things that was reiterated to us and reinforced over and over again, and you've covered this president for a long time as well, is how different, I don't think we can overstate how unrecognizable this term is to last term. But one of the ways is his world, and just in terms of inputs, has shrunk. Decisions are made inside the White House by, a handful of top officials in this government. They're constantly worried about leaks. So the information flow going back out is very limited, let alone coming in. And people are constantly trying to reach Trump on his cell phone and so forth. But his inputs, his news inputs, are so different than before. Yes, he still reads the New York Post. Yes, he reads the New York Times, despite what he says. And yes, he sometimes watches, cable news programs in the morning. But generally speaking, Fox News is it. Fox News is much more supportive of him overall, across the board, or at least less critical of him than it was in term one. He's not on Twitter. He used to, and several people said to us, he would go through Twitter in term one and he would see the replies or he would see the trending topics. He doesn't see any of that now. And the algorithm is obviously very different now under Musk's ownership. He looks at Truth Social, where everything, for the most part, is "you are fabulous," and so forth and so on. He has Natalie Harp, the aide who is often described as a human printer, who sits in a room with him in almost every meeting, almost every senior meeting. She is in more than basically any other major staffer. And she supplies him with a constant stream of positive news. But those positive news pieces are coming from Gateway Pundit or all kinds of other websites. He hears what he wants to hear. And when aides try to push back on him, as they did, and we write about this in the book for months, about you need to talk about affordability. You need to talk about what people are feeling. He doesn't want to hear it. And it is much easier for him to just close his ears and his inputs. So that is also how you end up with a situation where you can have Donahue fired. Right. You see this across government because they are not getting a lot of feedback elsewhere.
Jonathan, when you talk about the difference between his first term and now, and we were talking earlier about race, we don't even have an Omarosa in the White House this time. I mean, in the first term, you did have Omarosa Manigault, who appeared to be reaching out to some in the black community, me and others, even those of us that had fought Trump on Central Park 5 or whatever. The fact that there's no black inside the White House at all that we can see visible, and then you compound that with how we were just talking about Joe and Mika in the earlier segment, about how Hegseth just takes blacks off the wall at the Pentagon no matter what they've accomplished. Talk to me, and I've seen you refer to it in the book, about how this has been a blatantly kind of racially divisive administration, if not just outright racist.
I'm not sure it's that different from term one, to be honest with you, in that respect.
Well, I don't think it is, but the optics are different.
That's interesting. It's interesting to hear you say that, because from our... What do you think? I mean, I'm not sure it's that, in that respect, that different from term one.
I think that the output in terms of what they're doing is different to the extent that... I mean, I agree that I think that generally the sentiment is...
Jared not being so involved with
that's what it is. That's what I was thinking about. That's a good point,
actually. Yeah. The outreach seems less as well. Yeah. But I don't think they had much more representation in the first term.
They did not, a little bit, I mean, but very minor. Harrison Fields was the only black staffer who I could think of who was in the press office, and he left many, many months ago. But no, it was not. There was not huge representation, but there were people like Omarosa who did make some effort. Jared did have a lot of conversations with people on the Hill. Criminal justice reform. Yeah. He had a very good working relationship with Hakeem Jeffries, which was prior to Hakeem Jeffries being the leader. So in that respect, it is different. But I do think that it's funny because criminal justice reform, as you wrote before any of us when you were at Axios, it was one of Trump's signature pieces of legislation, and he hated it, and he did nothing but, complain about it for months and months and months. So what I would say is what you're seeing now is, and we talk about this in the book, how Steve Bannon would refer to pure Trump, and we're getting pure Trump now. We are getting pure Trump now.
And I just want to underscore, Maggie was talking about Natalie Harp earlier on, and I think she's an interesting figure to describe because she really evokes the atmosphere in there right now. That's right. And we obtained in the reporting for this book, I mean, we published it in the New York Times quite some time ago, but we obtained letters that she had written for the president and left in some of his private spaces. And they were very unusual letters, very personal letters. And they said things like, "You are all that matters to me." And they were left in some of his private spaces. And during the campaign, the Secret Service was actually quite alarmed by some of these letters. But she is someone that feeds him good news, that is a channel of information to him. If people want to get something to him that's going to be unvetted, that won't go through the chief of staff, they go through her. So that's the environment that Maggie was describing. And there wasn't really... that didn't really exist in term one, did it? There was nothing like that, exactly.
No, there was no gatekeeper that way. And there also wasn't as much and I was thinking about this the other day in terms of the reporters calling Trump, which we've obviously talked about a lot, directly on his cell phone. Part of why people do that this time is because the press office will not get ahead of him on anything. And, this happened more often in term one, and you know this, where he would just contradict his aides or cut their legs. We're seeing that a lot this week, obviously, with the housing bill, for instance. Right. But we write about this episode last year in the book around the 12-day war in Iran, where when Trump saw the Pentagon sort of modifying one of his Truth Social posts about "we control the skies" over Iran, he was furious, and that was the last time that you saw any kind of contradiction of what he was saying. So if you are a reporter who needs an answer fast, I understand why people are inclined to then just call him. It doesn't mean that you're getting reliable information, something that isn't going to be contradicted 15 minutes later. But if you're a staffer, it creates this climate of fear. And the other piece, too, that I would just add to that is you had Elon Musk, and we get into this in great detail, essentially serving not as a co-president, but as a co-president for parts of the first 4 months or so. And that created so much destabilization of this government that I think they also never quite recovered. But that's for another time.
Well, the Silicon Valley dynamic, though, and speaking of personal correspondence, I want to read from page 358 briefly, because this is after Jeff Bezos' wedding in Venice. And Bezos is talking to Trump, and Trump marvels. He asks, "How was it? Everyone was at your wedding." "It was great," Bezos replied. When the conversation turned to the guest list and Bezos mentioned that the actress Sydney Sweeney had attended, the president's interest deepened. Quote, "Ooh, many O's," end quote, Trump said. And so just to get inside of how Silicon Valley is dealing with President Trump and their knowledge of how to work him, how much of this is strategic, and how cynical is that strategy, I guess, Jonathan?
So we have a lot of reporting from the period after the election where Trump was sort of in his pleasure palace, at Mar-a-Lago. Everyone was coming to visit him. He was on top of the world. And it was very interesting because those tech titans Trump saw them as enemies in term one. People forget, he published a coffee table book in 2024 in which he threatened to send Mark Zuckerberg to prison for the rest of his life if he interfered in the 2024 election. So they come back to him, and there was this routine where Trump would host them on the patio at Mar-a-Lago, and he sits there holding court, he's got his iPad playing DJ, and he would pipe through the sound system the Star Spangled Banner while they're sitting there at dinner. But it was not the normal version of Star Spangled Banner. It was the version recorded by the J6 prison choir, okay? And of course, you're there, what are you going to do? So Zuckerberg stands up, hand on the chest, he doesn't know what this thing is. But they stand there, and it's the version of the Star Spangled Banner recorded by people who were imprisoned for their role in the January 6th riot.
Wow.
So that happened. We also have in the book, Trump was at his golf club at Doral, and he's showing off, this is around Christmas time, 2024, he's showing off text messages that he's received from Bezos and Zuckerberg. And Trump is basically gloating about how much they're, quote unquote, kissing my ass. The Bezos one was a smiling selfie from him and Lauren Sanchez, thanks for dinner, etc. The Zuckerberg sent him a letter written by one of his children, which was talking about the golden age of America. And Trump showed it off to Musk at Mar-a-Lago, and Musk said, quote, direct quote, "first-class groveling." So Musk was enjoying watching his rivals, suck up to Trump. I'm not going to speculate about motivation. I don't think it takes a great genius to realize that Donald Trump is willing to use government power to help and to hurt people. So, you don't really need to be a rocket scientist to figure out the motivations.
Literally, I guess. A literal rocket scientist.
Well, yeah.
Right. I mean, one of the things actually about the passage that you just read, what's striking about that scene is that it is Bezos coming into the Oval Office. Yes, they're discussing Sydney Sweeney and his wedding guests. But he's coming in to talk about a space contract specifically. There is a launch pad that he would like to see his company, Blue Origin, get. He doesn't explicitly say, don't give it to Elon Musk, who, you have to remember by then, this is July, and Elon Musk has been not quite banished, but banished from the Oval Office and the White House. And he suggests, Bezos, that Trump should tell the Deputy Defense Secretary, Steve Feinberg, to talk about contract diversity. That's the idea. Again, he doesn't explicitly ask. And by the way, SpaceX got that launch pad eventually, Pad 37 in Florida. But so much of, again, I can't get into Bezos's mind, but he has multiple companies. One of the scenes that was actually so striking to us in our reporting was Bezos, because there are multiple reasons why these guys are doing these things too. They felt very angry about DEI initiatives. Bezos in particular, I think I certainly did, and I can't speak for Jonathan, but until we were reporting this, I didn't realize how Bezos actually felt about the Washington Post as an investment. This is a storied newspaper that, helped bring down Richard Nixon, and Bezos is describing it to Trump over an intimate dinner during the transition as his worst financial investment ever.
He said, direct quote, Bezos to Trump, "The people there are terrible." Talking about the Washington Post, talking about the business side of the Washington Post. If they don't listen to me. And basically, we have this scene in the book where Trump and Bezos are essentially commiserating over the Washington Post.
Yes, how much they don't like it for maybe
different reasons. But that,
It's wild.
Kind of amazing, really, to think about the Graham family, and now you have Bezos commiserating with the president-elect over the Washington Post.
We're going to talk a lot more about this. I've got to say also one of the things
picture you paint.
You wonder how Elon Musk moved from being sort of voting for Democrats and Republicans, suggesting at times he was a Democrat. There are so many cell phones by the Democrats. In Musk's case, they talk about how there was a conference for EVs, and the Biden administration did not invite Elon Musk. And there's one example after another example after another example of how the Biden administration missed opportunities. I'm not saying that these people are saints. I'm not saying that they wouldn't have sucked up to Donald Trump in the end anyway. But a lot of decisions were made that pushed a lot of people in Silicon Valley that way.
I'm still stuck on the grotesque scene of the J6 choir music playing Hand on Hearts.
People who beat the shit out of cops on January the 6th being revered. We'll see how history plays that one.
We're going to continue the conversation on this really revealing blockbuster book, Regime Change. Much more ahead with Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan.
As White House correspondent Maggie Haberman and New York Times White House reporter Jonathan Swan about their revealing new book, Regime Change, Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. Pick up a copy if you can find one. Jonathan, one of the things, of course, about this first 18 months of the second term is Trump accumulating power. Another is accumulating wealth for himself and his family. Your book details some of these extraordinary efforts to do so, including on crypto.
Yeah, it's really hard to... We found this section quite difficult to write because we've never seen anything like this level of conflicts of interest and self-dealing in American history in terms of the scale of it. There is no... When you look for comparisons, you can find plenty of examples of conflicts of interest, in the past, previous administrations. But just, the sums of money we're talking about are of a different order. And crypto is obviously significant, but Maggie really got into the library fundraising, which I think is an area that's not really been focused on that much, but is another area that we found, a lot.
So one of the things, just one caveat here, which is that the collective we, the Wall Street Journal has done a lot of work, the Times, the Washington Post, a lot of outlets have done a lot of work on this. All of us have only scratched the surface, I think, of what is happening because there's so much we can't see. But in terms of what we can see, it's both the scale. So in terms of the crypto piece, the Trump sons, Steve Witkoff's sons, the president and Steve Witkoff started this crypto company in the middle of the campaign. And Steve Witkoff is said to have stepped back from it now. But regardless, 3 days or so before the inauguration, a 49% stake in this company was sold to some entity backed by an Emirati royal family member, top royal family member. That was not revealed publicly. It was done in secret. The Wall Street Journal uncovered it, and huge hats off to them for doing so. So it speaks to both the scale and the fact that it involves foreign countries. And there's just sort of no batting an eye. There is no congressional oversight over it. It is other people in Trump's government. But what's striking to us, too, to Jonathan's point about the library fundraising, is that, there's this plan for a Trump library in Miami. They were gifted a very valuable plot of land by the state. This is almost, there's so much happening so fast, John, that's almost, it's impossible to keep up with. But one of the donations that we learned of was Howard Lutnick, the sitting Commerce Secretary, at a time when Trump was very angry that Lutnick's sons, who remained at Cantor Fitzgerald, a New York firm we all know, Wall Street firm, bond firm, there were stories, including in our paper, about them making money off of actions or related actions to the Trump administration. Trump has not gotten upset, as far as we know, about Steve Witkoff's family's enterprises, but he was upset about this, and he was made aware of it, and he was constantly giving Lutnick a hard time. So Lutnick gave $25 million of his own money to the future Trump library, and Trump has said in meetings, including one that we capture with lots of people in it, in the Oval Office, that, the reason he puts up with Howard's, excuse my French, bullshit is because he gave me $25 million. In another version of the story, it's, oh, can you believe it? I just asked him and he gave me $25 million. I can't remember something like this, where you have and this is also, it is one of if the wealthiest cabinet that we've ever seen. So there are so many overlapping pieces of this. Separately, we found that on the fundraising part for the library, Eric Trump is leading that effort. And they are all collectively, the world fundraising for this, reaching out to, among others, sovereign wealth funds to fundraise for the library.
In the Gulf.
In the Gulf. This may have been a little more striking had it not been for the Qatari jet that was donated, but nonetheless, there's so much happening, and there's just radio silence from Congress. It's striking.
We had talked before, Maggie, when you were here early in the week. We talked about how everything he does is just not even from his gut, just off the top of his head. He'll just throw out a number for tariffs, throw out a number for this, throw out a number for that. You bring up the story about him, asking Witkoff for money. And that gave me $25 million. Reminded me of time and time again in your book, we see these moments where Donald Trump will demand a certain amount of payment from somebody. Paul Weiss comes in, Brad Karp comes in from Paul Weiss. They have nice chit-chat, nice talk. And by the way, you also see in this book that Donald Trump really doesn't like confrontation. So he'll call somebody the worst names, get them in, they'll have an hour talk, think they're doing well. And then before they leave, he asks them, I guess, for maybe they decide on $25 million, and then he's getting up and walking out, and Trump goes, so you're going to give me $45 million, I think was the number, just off the top of his head. And there are other times where he'll get a massive amount of money from somebody else, and then he'll go, man, I should have asked for more. Again, there's no rhyme, there's no reason. It's just kind of shooting from the hip constantly.
One of the things that struck us, and Jonathan has a lot of insight into that meeting with Brad Karp from Paul Weiss, but one of the things that struck us about those, that was in the context of those law firm EOs that the administration was doing, which have not fared well in court, but that's months later, and it takes a while until courts catch up to what's happening. One of the things that was so striking, two things I should say. One is you have the president's personal top legal advisor, Boris Epstein. He is not a government employee. He is in this meeting, negotiating this, or at least sitting there and then negotiating it later. Each new settlement with a law firm, and the law firm's perceived crimes were anything from, not representing people who had sued Rudy Giuliani, hiring people who had worked on the special counsel investigations. It goes on and on and on like this. One of the targets was the law firm that had employed Todd Blanche, who is now the acting attorney general, because at the time Todd Blanche wanted to represent Trump, and the firm wouldn't let him, according to our reporting. That was the main impetus there for that one. But they tried setting a new bar each time. So to your point, Joe, sometimes it's off the top of the head, but then that becomes the baseline. And they try very hard to get a bigger number. And you're seeing this across industries, media. We talked about the Smithsonian earlier, law firms. It goes on, tech firms. It goes on and on. Universities.
Sports.
Right.
FIFA. I'm flipping through your book, and the index is incredible, by the way. I'm going from Snoop Dogg to William the Conqueror to Sydney Sweeney, as aforementioned.
You might need to explain the William the Conqueror.
I would love, Jonathan, to take it to Gary Player and William the Conqueror, because this is a Mad Lib in which there's a historian that is himself providing some bold-faced names, if this is a familiar passage from our missalette here to reference.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about this when Maggie and I finally sat down with President Trump in March, and he handed us a 2-page document to read while we were sitting there. And he said it was written by a historian, and it described him as the most powerful man who has ever existed on the planet. And it went on to compare him to a group that he said to us was the quote-unquote the top 10. And it was Mao, Stalin, Adolf Hitler, William the Conqueror, Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun,
Alexander the Great,
the Caesars, Tamerlane, sort of small d liberal Democrats from the ages.
The pantheon of liberals.
But the point of the document and the point he was trying to make to us, it had nothing to do with morality. It was all about power. And the argument, the thesis of the document was that Donald Trump's the most powerful man who's ever existed because he's in charge of the US military, the most powerful economy in the world, the most powerful technology in the world, but he's willing to use that power, unlike many previous US presidents. Didn't turn out to be a historian. It turned out to be written by the former golf caddy for Gary Player, the famous golfer. But the thesis of the piece, was not so dissimilar, actually, to the thesis of our book, which is that Donald Trump is wielding power like no president in our lifetime, in some respects like no US president we've ever seen. And that was actually the impetus for the title of the book, Regime Change. It was about the fact that it's difficult as a reporter when you're covering something that feels like regime change in your own country. We're very comfortable with describing regime changes overseas, but this was not just a typical Democrat passing the baton to a Republican administration, and maybe you have a debate about marginal tax rates or regulations of certain industries. This was about a use of power that we haven't seen in our lifetimes, and that was the reason that we called the book Regime Change, because it is a form of regime change that we're living through right now in executive power. And it just simply is.
This was a title, by the way, that was conceived of prior to the Venezuela operation. So this had just been something that we were thinking about as we were doing the reporting for this book and the framework.
So, Maggie, I'm curious from both of you. I know you guys have to go. A lot of interviews today. I'm curious, what has the reaction been from the White House? What's the reaction been from the Hill? What's the reaction been from people who are inside this book? I haven't heard any threats of lawsuits. I haven't heard anybody screaming they're lying, because obviously you've got all the receipts here. But I'm curious, what's been the reaction, and what new have you learned over the last 4 days?
About how they're feeling? We have not heard any word of, any real word of, there's reporting in here that's incorrect. Certainly, we were struck that the vice president had said that he had, taken note of the accuracy of quotes in the Situation Room meeting reporting. But they can say, Joe, as you know and usually do, how they feel. But again, they have not contested a word of what we have written, at least that I've seen. Have you?
I haven't seen anyone dispute. It's now several weeks since we've published very detailed accounts from inside the Situation Room, and nobody has disputed a single word that was said in those meetings. So I guess we're waiting for that. But
maybe they will.
Maybe they will, but
not yet.
Not so far.
Yeah.
Is there a particular part of this book that you think tells the story of the first year better than anything? Like what is the anecdote? What is the meeting? What is the moment that you think encapsulates the chaos of year one?
That's a really good question. That would probably require me to have another cup of coffee. I don't know that there is just one specific moment. I will, but it comes at the very beginning of this year. And I think it is more about the ad hoc, it is about the ad hoc decision making, and it is also about the use of power. And it is this scene that we write about, and we published this in the New York Times, I don't even remember when, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, where after, this is literally days after Alex Preddy is killed in Minnesota, a protester, intensive care nurse who, had a permanent gun that they saw once he was on the ground, shot while he was lying on the ground multiple times. This was a few weeks after Renee Good had also been killed, mother of three, another protester, a poet. And there is a routine meeting in the White House Chief of Staff's office, Susie Wiles, and, we lay out this scene in detail, where people were sitting, who said what. The vice president walks in and says that he thinks this is the moment, and I'm paraphrasing, but he thinks this is the moment to invoke the Insurrection Act. Now, invoking the Insurrection Act, as a way to using troops to enforce domestic laws has been something that this administration talked about repeatedly in term 1, 2. It did not happen. This has been something that the Trump team has seen, not everybody, but some have seen as some kind of a weapon on the shelf, essentially. And it was so striking that Vance was suggesting it in that moment when there was just national outrage over these shootings. And these shootings came because of this flood of federal agents who were supposed to be doing immigration sweeps in Minnesota. And, even Stephen Miller in that moment, who had been very forceful about using the Insurrection Act in the past, was pretty, muted in talking about it, although he did support it. There was no one else in the room who thought it was a good idea, but they didn't put it aside forever. It was just tabling it for that moment. It's not gone. It just, remains there. And at least to my mind, Jonathan may have a different perspective, but to my mind, the fact that this was being discussed as how you use what Trump would call an iron fist in a moment of chaos, because Vance really does believe that all of these protesters are paid agitators, and he does believe there needs to be a crackdown, and we're not saying that we have evidence of that, just that that's what he thinks. Right. I think that encapsulates how things move and what the outlook is in this administration. But that's just me.
All right. On the edge. The must-read new book is Regime Change, Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. It's available now. Co-authors, New York Times White